The day Miriam Vance told the building's night security guard that she didn't need anyone watching over her, she said it the way she said most things, without looking up from her phone. "I'm not a child," she said, walking past the front desk of Hargrove Tower without breaking stride. "And I don't need a shadow." The guard didn't respond. He just watched her go, the way he always did, steady, unhurried, like a man who had learned a long time ago that the loudest people in a room were rarely the most dangerous. His name was Edmund Farris. He was 43 years old. He drove a 2009 Civic with a cracked passenger mirror, packed his daughter's lunch before every shift, and had been working the overnight rotation at Hargrove Tower for just under 2 years. Nobody on the executive floors knew much about him. Nobody had asked. Miriam Vance was the chief operating officer of Hargrove Capital, and she had spent the better part of a decade making herself impossible to ignore. She was precise, she was relentless, and she had a reputation for cutting people loose the moment they stopped being useful. She wasn't cruel, or at least, she didn't think of herself that way. She was efficient. There was a difference, she believed, even if the people on the receiving end couldn't always see it. She had never once thought about Edmund Farris. Not really. He was part of the building the way the elevator was part of the building, functional, expected, invisible. That changed on a Tuesday in November when someone broke into her car. It happened in the underground parkade level B2 sometime between 11 at night and 3 in the morning. Her laptop bag was gone. Her spare key fob, a folder of printed contract drafts she'd been meaning to bring home all week. The police were polite and unhelpful. The building's property manager was apologetic and equally unhelpful. The security footage from that particular camera had been corrupted. A technical glitch, they said. "Deeply sorry, these things happen." Miriam stood in the parkade in her coat and said nothing for a long moment. Then Edmund Farris appeared from around the corner of the support pillar, hands in his jacket pockets, and said quietly, "The footage isn't corrupted." She looked at him. "Sorry, it's not corrupted. Someone manually looped it." About 40 minutes of the same empty hallway on repeat. He paused. "I noticed the timestamp wasn't advancing. Mentioned it to the property manager this morning." Miriam stared at him. "And he told you it was a technical glitch?" "He did." There was a silence. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Edmund looked at her evenly. "Because it's your car." He didn't offer anything else. He turned and walked back toward the stairwell, and Miriam stood there in the cold underground air, watching him go, with the uncomfortable feeling that she had just been helped by someone she had never bothered to learn the name of. She found out his name from the building directory. Edmund Farris, night security, shift lead. She noted it the way she noted everything, filed it, moved on. What she couldn't file away quite as easily was what he had told her. If the footage had been manually looped, that meant someone in the building was involved. That meant it wasn't random. And Miriam Vance had made enough enemies over the years to find that information deeply, specifically worrying. She went to her company's head of corporate security the next morning. He launched an internal review. 3 days later, a mid-level IT contractor with access to the building's camera system was quietly let go, and 2 other executives found themselves having very uncomfortable conversations about a deal that wasn't supposed to exist yet. Edmund Farris had noticed a timestamp, that was all. And it had unraveled something Miriam might not have caught for weeks. She went back down to the lobby on a Friday evening, when the building was mostly empty and the marble floors reflected the overhead lights in long, pale strips. Edmund was at the desk. He looked up when she walked in. "The review found something," she said, "because of what you noticed." He nodded slowly. "Glad it helped. I'd like to buy you a coffee as a thank you." Something crossed his face, not quite discomfort, more like a careful recalibration. "That's not necessary." "I know it's not necessary," Miriam said. "I'm asking anyway." He was quiet for a moment then. "I'm on until 6. There's a place 2 blocks north that opens early." 7, a pause. "All right." She was there first. She ordered a black coffee and sat facing the door. Edmund arrived at 3 minutes past 7 in a jacket that wasn't a uniform, and he looked different without the desk in front of him. Less like furniture, more like a person who had a life on either side of the hours she'd ever seen him. He sat across from her and ordered the same thing she had. They talked for 40 minutes. It was not the conversation Miriam had expected. She had prepared to be gracious and brief. Instead, she found herself listening, actually listening, while Edmund described without drama or self-pity how he had come to be working nights at Hargrove Tower. He had spent 11 years with the Edmonton Police Service. Investigations Division eventually. He was good at it. He had a specific kind of patience that made him useful in rooms where other people got loud. Then his wife died, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and his daughter Poppy was 6 years old. And Edmund had looked at his life and realized that the job he was good at was also a job that could get him killed, and Poppy had already lost one parent, and he was not willing to make her an orphan. So he had stepped back, taken something slower, something safer, something that let him be home in the mornings to make breakfast and walk her to school. Miriam sat with that for a moment. "How old is she now?" she asked. "8," Edmund said. "She's in grade 3. She wants to be a marine biologist." There was something in his voice when he said it. Not pride exactly, something quieter than pride. Like the word marine biologist was the most important thing he'd heard in years. Miriam looked at her coffee cup. "You gave up a career you were good at." "I gave up a career," Edmund said simply. She didn't have a choice about losing her mother. She should have a choice about having a father around. Miriam didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure one was needed. What happened next was not her idea, or rather it was her idea but not in the way she would have chosen. The corporate security review turned up more than the looped footage. There were suggestions, not proof, not yet, but strong suggestions that Miriam had been specifically targeted. That someone with knowledge of her schedule and building access habits had been feeding information to a competitor. Her head of security recommended she vary her routines. Her assistant recommended she not work late alone on the empty upper floors. Her company's lawyer recommended a lot of things involving words like precautionary and liability. In the end, the building's security director approached Edmund Farris and asked if he'd be willing to take on an additional role, temporary, unofficial, essentially a personal security detail for Miriam during evening hours while the investigation was ongoing. Edmund said he'd think about it. He came back the next day and said yes with one condition: his hours needed to stay compatible with his daughter's school schedule. The security director agreed. Nobody told Miriam until it was arranged. She was not pleased. "I already told you," she said, standing in the building manager's office with her coat still on. "I don't need a babysitter, Ms. Vance. I have managed my own safety for 41 years. I don't need someone following me around the building like a—" "The breach was deliberate," the building manager said carefully. "And specific to you." The word specific landed the way he had hoped it would. Miriam closed her mouth. "Mr. Farris will be discreet," he added. "You won't even notice him." That, as it turned out, was mostly true. Edmund was extraordinarily good at being present without being intrusive. He didn't hover. He didn't make conversation she hadn't invited. He positioned himself at angles and distances that felt like coincidence until she started noticing the pattern, always between her and the nearest exit, always with a sightline to the elevator bank, always aware of who else was in the room before she was. It was, she thought, genuinely impressive. She had hired personal security before, years ago, when a disgruntled former client had made threats. Those people had been conspicuous, performative almost, the kind of presence that announced itself. Edmund was the opposite. He was the person you'd never remember was there. One evening, about a week into the arrangement, she was working late on the 32nd floor, and she looked up to find him in the doorway of the open-plan bullpen, back to the wall, reading something on his phone with the particular stillness of someone who had learned how to wait. "You don't have to stand there," she said. He looked up. "I know, there's a chair." He glanced at the chair nearest the door. "I can see more from here." Miriam looked at him for a moment. "Former police Edmonton," he said. "Investigations?" A small pause. "What made you ask that?" "The way you look at a room," she said. "You're not watching for threats. You're reading it." He considered that. "Both. Usually." She turned back to her screen, but she noticed after that she minded his presence less. Poppy came to the building exactly once, and it was not planned. Edmund got a call at 7:30 on a Thursday evening. The after-school program had a plumbing emergency. Parents needed to collect their kids immediately. His regular backup, his neighbor Mrs. Okafor, was in Mississauga visiting her son. He had no one. He came to find Miriam on the 34th floor and explained the situation plainly. "I have to go get my daughter," he said. "I can arrange a replacement or I can return once she's settled, but I need approximately 90 minutes. Miriam looked at him. Then she said something that surprised both of them. "Bring her back here." A pause. "Mrs. Vance, it's a secure building. She can sit in the boardroom. There's a couch. Does she have homework?" Edmund looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Usually, then bring her." He brought her. Poppy Farris was 8 years old and had her father's eyes and a backpack covered in iron-on patches of various sea creatures. She walked into Hargrove Tower's 34th floor boardroom with the calm self-possession of a child who had spent a lot of time around adults and knew how to behave around them. "Hi," she said to Miriam without shyness. "Are you Dad's boss?" "No," Miriam said. "I'm someone your father is helping." Poppy considered this. "Okay." She put her backpack on the table, pulled out a worksheet and got to work. Miriam went back to her own desk. But she could see through the glass wall of the boardroom, and she found herself glancing over every so often at the small girl with the sea creature patches, bent over her homework with her tongue pressed to the corner of her lip the way her father went still and watchful when he was thinking hard. At one point, Poppy looked up, caught Miriam watching, and gave her a matter-of-fact wave. Miriam waved back. Edmund returned from organizing a temporary handover of his downstairs duties and stood in the doorway of the boardroom watching his daughter work. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her the way Miriam was starting to recognize, like she was the thing he had organized the rest of his life around, and he didn't see any reason to pretend otherwise. The night it actually mattered was a Thursday 3 weeks later. Miriam had stayed past 11, which she knew she wasn't supposed to do. She had a call with a partner firm in Singapore that had run long, and by the time it ended the floor was empty, and the building had that particular late-night quiet that made footsteps echo. Edmund was in the hallway when she came out. He'd been there the whole time, she realized, patient, unhurried, reading something on his phone. They took the elevator down together. It was the first time they'd been in a small enclosed space, and Miriam noticed that he positioned himself between her and the doors, the way he always did, without appearing to think about it. "You do that automatically," she said. "Do what? Put yourself between me and the exit." He glanced at her. "Does it bother you?" She thought about it. "No," she said honestly, "it doesn't." The elevator reached B2. The doors opened. Edmund stepped out first, which Miriam had learned was his habit, sweep the space before she entered it. She waited the 2 seconds it took him to decide the parkade was clear, then followed. She was halfway to her car when she heard it, a quick, deliberate sound from the far side of the concrete pillar. Edmund heard it at exactly the same moment. She felt rather than saw him move, something decisive and unhesitating, and then there was a short, controlled confrontation in the shadows near the pillar that lasted about 8 seconds, and ended with a man she didn't recognize face down on the concrete with his arm bent at an angle that suggested he would not be trying anything else tonight. Edmund stood up. He wasn't breathing hard. He took out his phone, called building security, gave a calm and precise description of the situation, and then turned to look at Miriam. "Are you all right?" he asked. She realized she hadn't moved. "Yes," she said. Yes." There was a pause. Edmund looked at the man on the ground, then back at her, and something in his expression shifted. Not relief exactly, something more controlled than that. Like relief was what he would feel later, when the situation was fully closed. "You should call your lawyer," he said. "Tonight, not tomorrow." "I will," she said, and then because it seemed both insufficient and necessary, "Edmund." He looked at her. "Thank you." He held her gaze for a moment. "Go stand by the stairwell door," he said quietly. "I'd like to keep you in my sightline until building security gets here." She went. The investigation concluded 5 weeks later. The man in the parkade was a private investigator, a generous term, her lawyer said, hired by a competitor firm that had been attempting to acquire information about an upcoming deal. The mid-level IT contractor was connected to the same firm. It was, in the end, a fairly straightforward case of corporate espionage, and it was handled with the particular quiet efficiency that Hargrove Capital preferred for matters involving its reputation. Edmund Farris's role in the whole thing was noted internally and essentially nowhere else. The additional security arrangement was formally concluded on a Wednesday morning. Miriam's assistant sent the appropriate paperwork. Edmund signed it. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't, for reasons Miriam spent a week failing to articulate to herself. She was not a person who had difficulty articulating things. That was, in fact, one of the things she was specifically good at. But she found herself returning repeatedly to small moments that had no obvious business significance. Poppy's sea creature patches, the way Edmund read a room before he read anything else in it. The fact that he had rebuilt his entire life around a child who wanted to be a marine biologist and had never once complained about any of it. She had met a great many accomplished people. She had sat across from executives and developers and fund managers, and she had evaluated their competence and their usefulness, and she had, on the whole, been right about them. She was good at assessing people. She had not, she realized, assessed Edmund Farris correctly. She had looked at the desk, the uniform, the cracked mirror Civic, and she had filed him under building staff and moved on. And he had, in the 11 months before she had bothered to look up from her phone, been standing 12 feet from her every night, doing his job with a quality and a steadiness and a particular kind of principled intelligence that she was only now beginning to understand. That embarrassed her. It was not a feeling she was accustomed to. She went down to the lobby on a Friday evening with no specific plan. Edmund was at the desk. He looked up when she walked over the same way he always had, calm, unhurried, giving her his full attention without making anything out of it. "The arrangement's been concluded," she said. "It has," he agreed. "I wanted to say, formally, that the way you handled everything was exceptional. The footage, the parkade, all of it." He nodded. "I'm glad it worked out." There was a beat of silence. "I'd like to have coffee again," Miriam said. "Not as a thank you this time." Edmund looked at her steadily. "What time?" "Saturday, 8 o'clock, the same place, if that works." He was quiet for a moment. Something passed through his expression, consideration, and something else underneath it, something he didn't volunteer. Poppy has swimming at 9:30, he said. I'd need to leave by 9, that's fine, Miriam said. An hour is fine. He nodded once. Saturday at 8. She turned to go. Then for reasons she didn't fully examine, she stopped. The marine biology thing, she said, without turning around. Is she serious about it? A pause. Then Edmund said in that particular quiet voice, she's been serious about it since she was 5. Miriam nodded at the lobby doors. There's a Marine Research Foundation that does a youth program in the spring. I sit on their advisory board. She paused. I'll send you the information. She walked out before he could respond. Behind her, Edmund Farris sat at the desk for a long moment, looking at the doors after they had closed. The lobby was empty and the overhead lights reflected in the marble the way they always did, long, pale, steady. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the woman who had walked past his desk for almost a year without learning his name. And the woman who had told him an hour ago that an hour of his time was fine, because Poppy had swimming at 9:30, and of course she did. He thought about the way life occasionally did something he hadn't predicted, and how he had learned, after everything, to pay attention to those moments instead of explaining them away. He looked down at his phone, pulled up the new message notification. The subject line read, Spring Youth Program, Marine and Freshwater Sciences, University of British Columbia. Underneath it, one line, she'd be a good fit. MV Edmund read it twice, then he set the phone down on the desk, face up, and went back to watching the lobby. But something had shifted in the quality of his stillness. Something had changed very quietly in the way he was waiting.